here. I'm Glenn. Good morning if you're on the West Coast, and good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. My name is Becky Robinson, and I'm thrilled to welcome you today to the Online Servant Leadership Summit. I have today with me as my co-host, Karin Hurt, and I'm thrilled to introduce you to her. Karin is a keynote speaker, a leadership consultant, and an MBA professor. She has over 2 decades of experience in sales, customer service, and HR. She's on Inc.'s list of 100 great leadership speakers. She's on the AMA's list of 50 leaders to watch in 2015, and she's one of the top thought leaders in trust across America. Karin actually just launched her new multimedia leadership e-course, Results That Last, 7 roles every manager must master, and she's the author of a book coming in 2015 called Winning Well, A Manager's Guide to Getting Results Without Losing Your Soul. Karin, I'm so thrilled that you've joined us for this event today.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. And so I'd also like to introduce Becky. Becky is the founder of Weaving Influence, and I've had the opportunity to work with her over the last several years and have just watched her as she's helped really further the cause of servant leadership by working to get the message out through book promotion and other means. So it's been a delight to work with her. And then also she now leads the Lead Change Group, which is another great group to get involved in if you are interested in servant leadership.
Thanks so much, Karin. And I'm also thrilled today to share with you the upcoming schedule briefly of the other sessions today, and also to introduce you to our first 2 guests, Dr. Ken Blanchard and Dr. Ken Jennings. Welcome. We're so glad to have you today.
Great to be here.
Good to be with you.
So tell me quickly, Ken and Ken, where are you calling in from today?
I'm in San Diego.
Well, I'm in beautiful Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Wonderful. Well, it's such an honor and a privilege to spend this next half hour with the 2 of you as we dive into the topic of servant leadership. I want to take just a moment to introduce these 2 Kens. Between these 2 Kens, there have been millions of business books sold around the world. And starting with Ken Blanchard. Ken was inducted in 2005 into Amazon's Hall of Fame as one of the top 25 best-selling authors of all time. Ken received his master's degree from Colgate University and his bachelor and doctorate degrees from Cornell University in New York. The most recent title that Ken has launched is Collaboration Begins With You, with his 2 co-authors, Eunice Parisi-Carew and Jane Ripley. And he also published this year the new 1 Minute Manager, which is a revised look at that classic title. Ken has authored or co-authored more than 60 books. And Mr. Dr. Ken Jennings, he is also a best-selling author, a speaker, and an active consultant around organizational leadership. He's the co-author of The Serving Leader, which is coming in February of 2016, a new edition of that book, and his co-author is John Stallworth. Dr. Jennings has his PhD in organizational behavior from Purdue University and is also a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. We were just chatting about that as we were getting ready for this call, and I've heard there's some great stories, so if there are any related to that in this topic of servant leadership, we'd love to hear them.
Sure.
So Karin, I'm going to turn things back to you, and I know that you have some questions as we dive into the topic of servant leadership today.
Terrific, thank you. So as we start the day, let's just start with the basics. How do you define servant leadership?
So I think we're going to alternate getting started on each of these questions. So this is, to me, I start with the definition Greenleaf starts with, and I like it because Greenleaf says you can define a serving leader by what's happening around the serving leader. You're a serving leader if your team is getting healthier, if they're making progress, they're working well together. So the definition of who you are, paradoxically, is what is going on with others around you. So I love that definition. I think in our work in tooling up serving leaders, we've added to that by trying to give serving leaders the right kinds of tools that make a difference day to day in their lives. So that's how I define it. How about you, can be.
You know, it's interesting, Ken. You know, when I talk to audiences, and you probably found the same, when I mention servant leadership, they think I'm talking about the inmates running the prison or trying to please everybody, and because they think you can't lead and serve at the same time. And their problem is that they don't understand that there's two aspects about servant leadership. The leadership part is all about vision and direction and goals, because leadership's about going somewheres, and the responsibility for making sure that happens has to be with a traditional hierarchy. It doesn't mean you don't involve other people in setting the vision and direction and values and goals and all, but it's your responsibility that they have it. And so out there in the audience, as if people aren't clear where you're headed and where you stand for and your values and all, shame on you, because it's your responsibility. But once that's clear, then we kick to the servant part of servant leadership. And now you have to philosophically turn the pyramid upside down. And now the job of the leader is to serve the people who eventually serve your customers. And Ken, what I have found is that the great companies really understand that, and they think actually that their number one customer is their people. And if they take care of their people and empower their people and trust their people, they go out of the way to take care of their second most important customer, the people who use their products and services. When they do that, they become raving fans, and then that takes care of the third most important customer, the stockholders and the owners. And I think one of the problems with Wall Street and all those kinds of things is that they have it reversed. So it's all about making money. And I think if you're a servant leader, you think profit is the applause you get for creating and motivating people so they take care of your customers. So that's a long-winded answer, Ken.
No, I love that framework. And, you know, I think the companies that have done well, I was just reviewing this data the other day, Ken. If you had invested in public companies that have explicit serving leader cultures, you would have something like a 23% compounded return for at least 15 years. You would have well outperformed the stock market. So the way you put it, put your employees first, break through barriers, one of the actions we put in the serving leader, up in the pyramid, put yourself in a position to serve them, and then they serve the customers who then serve the stockholders. The data bears out what you just said. So I agree that the research is there to back that up.
Yes, and you know, I look at every leading company in their field, and I see that. But Karin, I interrupted you there.
Sir, I was just going to ask you, can you tell us what that study is so that our listeners can look that up?
Yeah, in fact, we're going to put on the website for you to download one of the case studies from an organization with my good friend Joe Paternchak at the Cleveland Clinic, where they've gone from an engagement score that Gallup measured, you know, not so hot, all the way up to top quartile. We're making available to the listeners today an explicit case study. The study I was referring to comes out of a book called The 7 Pillars of Serving Leadership that's out there, and you can get that as well. If you need to get the exact reference, just shoot me an email. We all have personal stories about this, and Ken, I know you do as well. I was a young officer when it occurred to me that this was a way to get results out of a team. I was on an island in a faraway place, and everything was going wrong. We lost a helicopter with our first doctor right away. The weather's terrible. Nothing's arriving on time. And I kind of waded out into the middle of all the guys working with me. I was a young officer, and I said, hey, who's in charge here? And they all kind of turned to me and said, well, frankly, you are, sir. I said, okay, we're going to do this a little differently. You all have a lot more experience than I do. Let's do this together. And we kept each other safe. We achieved the mission, and in my gut, I got a sense for it's a whole lot better to work with the team than try to tell them what to do. Then, like my good friend Ken Blanchard, we went on to do academic work, and it simply validated what we knew in our gut was really going to work. So we all had those kinds of stories. That was an early one for me.
Yeah. Well, my father, as you know, Ken, was an admiral in the Navy and quite a guy. And
Yeah.
I never forget, I won the president of the 7th grade in New Rochelle in junior high, and I came home and I was all pumped up, and my dad said, "Congratulations, Ken, but now that you're president, don't ever use your position, because great leaders are great because people respect and trust them, not because they have power." And he said, "Ken, if you don't listen to your men, they don't tell you where the problems are." He said, "In the Navy, you better watch your tail because you're going over the side."
Yeah. That's a great story.
Yeah.
That's a great story. I'm sorry,
So
Karin, we cut you off.
You've both been working in this space for some time now and done a lot of bit of writing. What would you say has changed over the years in terms of thinking around servant leadership?
I think the big thing is that in the past, leadership has been more considered, control kind of thing, power and control, and command and control. And I think what's really happening that I think is helping servant leaders is people are starting to look at leadership as side-by-side leadership and partnership leadership. And I think that's really been a interesting change, don't you think, Ken?
I really agree with that. And I think it's also, we've put our raft in the water on serving leadership that's moving pretty quickly. I sense one thing that's changed is we're transitioning out of a philosophical movement that Greenleaf and others started. This resonates with your heart, into a very practical movement that this can actually work day to day and create results. So in the work that we've been trying to do, we've been trying to tool up leaders on how would you run meetings differently? How would you coach others differently? How do you address barriers differently? How do you raise the bar or the standards of performance differently? And there's a constellation now of tool builders that I think that many of us are contributing to, but we're not the only ones. There's a plethora of tools coming out. Before it was get the philosophy and do the right thing. Now I see what's different is there's a lot of tools to bring into your meetings and your day-to-day life, and that's making it real. So you put into action. We called this book that our friend Ken Blanchard wrote the foreword to. Thank you, Ken. We called it The Serving Leader with an ING on purpose. The ING was to communicate this is something you do. You see each other serving and encourage each other. So I'd say the movement is now moving into a practical outcome, and the availability of tools are making this easier to do. Those are two of the differences I see as well. I agree with Ken.
Ken, I've been thinking about writing a book called Duh. Why isn't common sense common practice? And what you're really saying, because when I look at companies I've worked with, they're all number one in their field, whether it be Southwest Airlines in that field, Chick-fil-A in the quick service business, Nordstrom's in retail, Synovus in financial services, Wegmans in the grocery business. Every one of those companies believe in serving leadership, and that's why I think they kill the competition. I don't know why the rest aren't getting aboard, but I think with tools now, I think people can know that it's not just an art, it really is a practice.
Well, you bet. And, we've done a lot of work in healthcare. You named some great companies in healthcare, the Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins, Atlanta Care, Fresenius have all adopted serving leader as their main operating mechanism. And at the Cleveland Clinic, our good friend Joe Patternjack helped to stimulate something that I thought was extraordinary. You usually think of the caregivers as the doctors and nurses who take care of you. As a bold statement at the Cleveland Clinic, they up into the pyramid so that their statement now throughout the clinic is, get this, Ken, we're all caregivers here. And that includes the parking lot attendants, the painters, civil engineering, everyone, not just the doctors. And that, by saying we're all caregivers, it helps to create a culture. We're all in this together. I give my best. And the results are speaking for themselves. Now they're training serving leaders by the thousands at the clinic, and others are looking at them in places like Hopkins to figure out how to create results through everyone. So I really think that we're at a tipping point for a movement.
Terrific. Well, with that said, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges as we continue to work to move this movement forward?
You know, I think some of our tired, old organizational practices that are in some ways opposed to a way of releasing the energy of everyone need to be done away with. My friend Ken Blanchard has for years, I've heard you talk about the annual review. You know, I think my old firm, Accenture, has done away with the annual review, and Deloitte, and many are. They're substituting now coaching sessions throughout the year where your leaders and managers are there to help you achieve your goals, not just review your practices. We say in the book something contrarian. Instead of having a list of your strengths and weaknesses, and, you know, we've all gotten these reviews, so then the advice typically is, so go work on your weaknesses. Turns out that's really lousy advice. They're called weaknesses for a reason. You're bad at it, and you're likely to remain bad at many of them for a long time. Better to keep building on your strengths, as Gallup has developed and my friend Ken has emphasized. So we look at creating interlocking teams of serving leaders, or one person with a strength dovetails with another person who needs that strength. I think many of the practices and the way we train managers in the business schools and medical schools need to migrate to better ways of getting exciting results out of all of us. And I think that's what's changing. Some of the old practices can go away, and new practices that many of us are helping to develop, I hope, will take the place of that. What about you, Ken? What do you think?
Well, you know, I just came out with a book with two of my colleagues called Collaboration Begins With You. You know, be a silo buster, and I think you're so right, is that that 1 + 1 is a lot greater than 2, and if we really utilize the people's differences, and if everybody around you thinks the same, then there's a bunch of you that aren't necessary,
Right.
really. And you know, about reviews, of all the things that we teach in our training, the one that's the most practical and will make the biggest difference is what we call one-on-one meetings. We ask every manager leaving our training to go back and have one-on-one meetings every 2 weeks with each of their direct reports for 15 to 30 minutes. And the manager schedules the meeting, but the direct report sets the agenda. And if you met with somebody 26 times a year and they can talk about anything that's important, they might have a sick kid, they have to work at home, or this and all. At the end of the year, a review is not necessary because you've been ongoing working with each other, and your main goal is to how do you get people to do well? How do they get them an A? You know, when I was a college professor, I always gave the final exam the first day of class, and I got in trouble because the faculty would say, "What are you doing?" I'd say, "I'm confused." You'd say, "You acted." So we're supposed to teach these kids. You are. Don't give them the questions in the final. And I'd say, no, we got to give them the questions in the final. What am I going to do all semester? I'm going to help them answer the questions so when they get to the final exam, they get A. Life's about getting A's. And as you said, helping people accomplish their goals.
You know, I think one of the things that's pleasantly surprised me about getting feedback from serving leaders everywhere, they'll almost come up to us apologetically and they'll say, "We love the tools that you're giving us on upending the pyramid, blazing the trail, raising the bar, building on strength, running to great purpose. We love those tools for work. But you know what?" And they'll say this almost in a whisper tone. They'll say, "This stuff really works at home. It helps me with my kids. It helps me with my relationships with my wife. Is that okay, Ken?" And we're delighted to say, this is for the whole person. Being a serving leader should work at work, for sure, but it should work at home. It should work in your life. It should work in your church. So what I like about this, again, and I have to say it's a discovery, a journey for me, is that we're helping the whole person to achieve outcomes and results and be happier with what they're doing, regardless of the venue, work, life, home, church, the whole thing. So I like that. So I'm agreeing with you that it's a new way, a delightful way of doing work, I believe.
Well, it's interesting, Ken, you know, in seminars I'll say to people, how many of you think you're a leader, you know. And only about 20% of the people put their hands up, and they're all managers and all. And then I say to them, why don't you think about who impacted your life the most in terms of who you are as a human being? And then I ask them to share, you know, who did. And hardly anybody mentions a manager or supervisor.
Yeah.
It's their mother, their father, grandfather, uncle, neighbor, and all. So I try to tell them that leadership is an influence process, and we all have life role leadership positions as parents, you know, as neighbors, as citizens and all. And then you might have an organizational position where you actually have a formal role and all, but all of us are leaders in all aspects of our lives because it's an influence process.
Well, I wanted to squeeze this in here. It'll probably embarrass my friend Ken Blanchard, but I wanted to say I've had a chance over the last number of years to watch Ken and Margie Blanchard in various professional as well as very quiet personal moments, leading differently. It's one thing to watch your friends on stage, and Ken Blanchard's brilliant on stage, but I've watched him in the quiet moments with family and friends lead just as authentically in those settings as I see him on stage. That tells me he's a serving leader. It's good. Many of us came into this field because we had family. My dad was a serving leader. Ken's dad, I know, was a World War II hero and led well. And I addressed my oldest son in his group of special operations colleagues once in a confidential location, and I got to look out on 50 or so young people getting ready to go into harm's way. He's getting ready to gear up and go somewhere else again, and I told them stories from my personal life, and I asked them to reflect on how they were raised, the values they were raised with, and I gave them another model to think about leadership. I made a very personal appeal to them. Some of them, went to give their lives for the country. Others are still leading. And I believe this is a model of leadership that both Ken and I believe in with our heart. This isn't an occupation for us. It's a calling and a mission, and it's a privilege for us to provide tools to those around us who want to lead differently, and that's why we're in the game. I just wanted to thank my friend Ken B. Personally for inviting me to write a book, The Serving Leader Differently and to Live Differently. So there you have it. He'll be embarrassed, but I wanted to slide that in there.
Well, I think the reason we both do that is that we both share another thing in common. We married above ourselves. So if we get off of being serving, we get slapped around by
That's right. We did that. I was thinking about backing down from a discussion once with a client around serving leadership, and my wife Heather was listening both to me and the head of HR, and she said, you guys need to step up here. You need to show a little backbone. And she was on speakerphone, so my client said, okay, we're going to keep pressing on with the serving leader thing. So you're right, Ken. We married up.
So just one more question before we go to the audience questions. What advice would you have for emerging leaders just starting out on their leadership journey of how they can begin to approach their manager and leadership responsibilities in a serving way?
Well, I'd say three things real quick. I'm really curious about Ken's answer to this. The first is there's some terrific research and books out now. We now have a wave of published books that are results-driven that I'd recommend. The speakers you're going to hear on the rest of today's webinar, I'd get every one of their books. Books are a great thing. If you have any trouble finding them, send a note to me or Ken and we'll help you. The second I'd say is get in a cohort group. You'll find with very little effort those that are trying to lead from a serving perspective and get in and both give and get coaching from them. There's serving leader groups in your city. If you want to find out who's doing this, drop me a note. But get into colleagues. And the third thing is pretty personal here. I do this, and I'm sure many of you do, but write in your journal every week. What did I try to do, and what were the results of it? And I hope you experienced some failure. Because those who haven't dealt with failure early in your career, you're going to run into it sooner or later. Keep a journal that says, what did I try to do as a serving leader? What worked and what didn't work? The things that work, do more of it. The things that didn't work, go back to the second thing I said, get coaching from your peers to go do it. So read it, be in a relationship, and keep a journal. I'd say those three things practically. What about you, Ken?
You know, in terms of journaling, I now journal, and you'll get a kick out of it because I tie it in the 1 Minute Manager. I first put at the end of the day praisings. What did I do today that's consistent with who I wanted to be? And then I put redirections. What things would I like an instant replay? And if you keep a track of that, you'll notice the things that you're having trouble with, and you can start to work on those and all. That might be another thing I might recommend. You could find a mentor, somebody who could really be a good model for you in terms of the behaviors that you're working on. And I'm having fun right now. I'm writing a book on cross-generational mentoring.
Great.
This wonderful gal who was the head of social innovation for Twitter, and she's 32, and I'm 76, because she came to me and said, you know, in the past, mentors have been older. She said, I think that's still important, but you older types need younger people to mentor you, particularly around technology. So
I love it.
So I think looking at cross-generational mentoring is nice.
Boy, I love it. You know, I'm in an accountability group once a month. I get on with a conference call with a group of peers. They're in businesses. One's a Catholic priest. They're all over the country, and we've been doing this for a couple of years. We get on once a month. We set up a 1-800 conference call line, and we encourage each other, young and old. And we added a young woman. She just had her first baby. We all got to see the baby and delight in her family. She's a young serving leader. So it's multi-generational. I want to keep doing this as long as I can. So I agree with that. Well, we heard there's some questions from the audience. So if they're hard ones, please ask Dr. Blanchard. If they're really softball, I'll take some of those.
That's fun. We do have several questions from attendees. I'd like to start with this one. It's a question that came from Randy. He's wondering what you two see as the key differences or similarities between authentic leadership and servant leadership.
Oh, that's a great one.
You know, being authentic really means being who you say you are. And I think that you can't be a servant leader if you just talk about it. You have to do it. And I think that's what authenticity is congruency, don't you, Ken?
I really believe it's being consistent with what you do. Well, if you look at study after study, when they say what kinds of leaders will you follow, the number one criteria in many of those studies is trust. You'll follow a leader that you trust, and trust comes from keeping your words, and when you blow it up, going back, transparency, and saying I messed up. I'll say this about myself today. I sent a note to one of my dear friends today, and I said, you know, I've messed up in our relationship. I'd like to ask for your forgiveness. And he shot a note back to me and said, you're already forgiven, Ken. A wonderful note. And he said, when you get back from this trip, let's get together and let's keep ironing out our relationship. And it used to be, I would just say, I'm right about a lot of this, and I'd press on. And I've learned from good serving leaders that you're not always right. And when you've messed it up, go back and repair those relationships. That may be a bit more personal than you were looking for, but that's what I think.
I think that's very helpful. So I have another question for you. It comes in from Tom, and he's wondering what a servant with healthy boundaries looks like.
So boundaries are pretty important, I think. It's here's a practical one, that if you put yourself in a position to say, I'm going to help you break through barriers, that's a good role. I'm going to help you to succeed. You don't want that to turn into a revolving door where everyone else's problems becomes yours. So they just come in with the monkey on their back, and they transfer the monkey onto your back, and you have a stack up of monkeys. A better way of handling that is to say, let me work with you to help you create the breakthrough, and you coach them on what they might try differently. You connect them with someone else with resources. You give them other ideas to try, but mostly you pull it out of them. So you turn, it's a downside risk if you suddenly become the organization's problem solver. You're never going to be able to win at that. But if you become the person who helps others to take on the outcomes themselves, coach them, give them the resources to do it. Now you genuinely are a serving leader, and you give them the credit when they achieve it. A serving leader gives credit away all the time, and you can spot them because they're personally humble about outcomes. They're giving the credit back to others.
Yeah, Jim Collins, I think, does a good job on that. He said that the great leaders, when things go well, they look out the window to give everybody credit, and when things go wrong, they look in the mirror and take responsibility, where self-serving leaders, when things go well, they look in the mirror and pound themselves on the chest and tell themselves how great, and when things go wrong, they look out the window to see who to blame.
Well, you know, I even see this as we watch, we're in the season of the presidential debates, and not a political statement, but if you listen carefully to how people use the word we versus I, if you listen carefully to giving credit to others, you start thinking about a candidate who can build a team even of adversaries around them. And you start to get a hint with the language they use and the stories they give of what kind of leader they're going to be. I think we need a serving leader next, and I'm looking to spot those serving leaders that are in the race.
If you spot one, tell me, because I'd like to vote for him.
Well, thanks so much for that, Ken and Ken. I have one final question we have time for today. It came in from Angie, and she's wondering how a serving leader can flourish in an environment where leadership is self-serving and defeating.
Well, you know, I think what you got to do is take care of business for your people and all, and one of the best ways in a non-self-serving environment is to bucket and do what you think is important, and then get the results. So then they come to you and say, we've been watching the results you get. How do you do that? And then you can start to tell them. And also, if you're going to work up the hierarchy, don't attack people up the hierarchy. Just tell them, you know, I went to this workshop or I read this book, and here's what I got out of it. You know, make I statements. And, you know, I don't know if this has any meaning to you, but you want to develop relationships with people, not criticize them.
Well, I completely agree with Ken's perspective on that. And I think I've seen this now with our client base, where one department will start with it. And I'll take the example from the Cleveland Clinic in orthopedics. They chose to address this from a serving leader perspective. And their outcomes, quality, cost, safety were so outstanding. I could literally see the other physicians and other groups on tippy-toe leaning in to say, can you tell me how you did that? So they want to go into it as well based on results. And I had one of those experiences where I was invited into a group of 30 young caregivers that were selected by their peers because of their outstanding success with patients. And I did something that a consultant does, a brilliant intervention. I asked them to introduce each other. That's all I did. And story after story after story of these 30 people who were from all across this big organization, they described themselves with the heart of a serving leader. So do you think that encouraged everyone else who was hearing that to go try it? You bet. These were people who were selected by their peers for what they did. And just telling their personal story was so outstanding, so heartfelt, others wanted to join in. So thanks for these questions from the audience. Ken, I think we ought to do this on a regular basis, get us together and just tell some stories. So this is fun for me. I wanted to thank Weaving Influence for bringing us together. And the books are out there. The stories are out there. My friend, Dr. Ken Blanchard, I'll see you here in a few weeks.
All right.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks so much, Ken and Ken. Just a quick reminder, Ken Blanchard's two most recent books, Collaboration Begins With You and The New 1 Minute Manager, and Ken Jennings, the author of The Serving Leader, with a new edition coming in February of 2016. Karin, thanks so much for joining us for today's conversation.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Look forward to it again soon. Bye-bye now.
Thanks.